I never thought my life would unravel into something so unrecognizable, so quietly hollow. Here I am, a woman in her mid-40s, standing in the middle of an elegant sunlit home, the kind people might envy from the outside. But inside, within these immaculate walls and perfectly arranged rooms, I've never felt more invisible. It's a strange kind of loneliness, the kind that doesn't scream or demand attention, but lingers silently in every corner, every sigh, every untouched dinner plate. My husband, once attentive and present, had become little more than a ghost who passed through. His business trips began as short getaways, then stretched into longer absences, days, then weeks. Eventually, I stopped asking when he'd be back. When he did return, it was with the same mechanical smile and briefcase in hand, offering pleasantries and empty words. We lived like polite strangers sharing a house, not partners sharing a life. The conversations were superficial, the physical connection non-existent. I couldn't remember the last time he touched me without it feeling rehearsed. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. Still, I played the part. I kept the house spotless, made meals I knew he wouldn't eat, waved to the neighbors with a practiced smile, and wore makeup for no one but the mirror. Outwardly, everything seemed fine, picture perfect even. But inside I was slowly vanishing. Dimming like a light no one noticed was flickering out. Then came early spring, with its deceptive promise of renewal. That was when he told me he'd be leaving again, this time for nearly a month. I stood there, nodding as he delivered the news like a routine update. I didn't argue. I never did. I told myself I was used to it by now, that I'd made peace with this strange half-life. But part of me knew better. Acceptance isn't the same as fulfillment. It's just quieter. It was only about a week after he left when Aiden came home. My stepson, back from college for spring break. 22 now. Tall, confident, and thoughtful in that quiet way he'd always been. I'd helped raise him since he was in middle school. Our relationship had always been warm but proper, bound by mutual respect and the unspoken rules of a blended family. But something was different now. He had changed, matured. His presence carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. And there was something new, something curious, in the way he looked at me. Not unkind, not inappropriate, but different. Like he was seeing me for the first time. And perhaps, in some strange way, I was seeing myself too. It wasn't inappropriate, not at first, but it was different. I noticed his eyes lingered a little longer. His compliments, once casual, now felt personal. "You look beautiful today," he said one morning in the kitchen. His voice warm. I laughed it off, but my heart fluttered. It started subtly, almost unnoticeably. Just small, ordinary moments that gradually became routine. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence. Aiden and I just happened to be in the same room more often. Just happened to reach for the same dish at the same time. Just happened to laugh at the same line on the TV. But as the days passed, it became clear that we were orbiting around each other in a new way. Not deliberately, not dangerously, but undeniably. He'd offer to carry the groceries in from the car, even when I insisted I could manage. He started helping in the kitchen, suggesting we cook dinner together like it was no big deal. We moved around each other with a quiet rhythm, chopping, seasoning, setting the table, and every now and then, his hand would brush against mine. Accidental, maybe, but not forgettable. He lingered after meals, settled beside me on the couch during late-night TV reruns. His presence steady, almost comforting. The glow of the screen wasn't the only warmth I felt. I tried to ignore the way my pulse shifted when he was near, how I suddenly became aware of myself again. My posture, my hair, the way my dress clung just slightly too much. I wasn't blind. I felt the change, subtle as it was. The tension hung in the air like the heavy scent of spring rain. Something beautiful but unpredictable. Then one evening, the sky painted itself in shades of gold and lavender, and we found ourselves sitting side by side on the porch, silently watching the sun sink beyond the trees. The breeze was cool, the kind that hinted at summer but still held spring softness. We didn't speak for a while. Then, without warning, he turned to me and said something I hadn't expected. Something simple but disarming. "I've always admired you," he said. "You're the one who's held this family together. You've been strong for my dad, for everyone. Even when it couldn't have been easy." His voice was calm, low, sincere. Not performative. Not flippant. There was something about the way he said it. No hesitation, no agenda, just truth. And that truth slipped through a crack in the wall I didn't realize I'd left open. For a moment I couldn't answer. His words stunned me, not because they were dramatic, but because they were real. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to me that way. Not with admiration. Not with recognition. I had been invisible for so long that hearing someone say they saw me felt almost unreal. I looked at him then. Not as the boy I had once guided through awkward adolescence. Not as my husband's son, but as a man. A man whose gaze wasn't casual or careless. It was steady, present. And in that gaze, I saw something I hadn't felt in years. Validation. Curiosity. Maybe even desire. But more than anything, I saw that he noticed I was alive. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our conversations, the way he looked at me, the way I didn't pull away. I told myself it was harmless, but deep down I knew I was lying. I knew this was more than loneliness. I had crossed an emotional line I could no longer deny. When I saw him again the next morning, his smile made me nervous. I was beginning to crave that attention, that feeling of being wanted, even if it was wrong. For the first time in a long while I felt awake. But I also felt afraid. I hadn't done anything, not yet. But I knew I was close, and if something didn't stop me soon, I wasn't sure I'd be able to walk away from what was coming. It happened on a Thursday evening. The house was quiet, and the air felt heavier than usual. I had just finished dinner when the rain started falling hard, followed by a sudden power outage. With no lights, no distractions, and only candles for warmth, the atmosphere shifted. Aiden walked into the living room holding 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you could use this," he said, smiling gently. I hesitated but took the glass. We sat in silence, the only sound being the rain tapping against the windows. The wine loosened my guard. Our conversation drifted from memories to emotions. He opened up about how lost he'd felt lately, how much he appreciated being home, how being around me made him feel safe. I listened, comforted by the honesty. Then he said something that stopped me cold. "You don't even realize how incredible you are, do you?" I looked at him, confused, but he didn't look away. "You deserve someone who sees you," he continued. "Someone who actually makes you feel alive." My heart pounded. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell him this was inappropriate, but I didn't. Instead, I let his words soak in. I was starving for affection, for validation, and at that moment, it didn't matter who was giving it. I told him that sometimes I felt like I was fading in this house, like no one really saw me anymore. He reached for my hand, held it gently, and I didn't pull away. It felt so natural, so quiet, like we had arrived here not by choice but by force of circumstance. His touch wasn't forceful. It wasn't aggressive. It was tender and sincere. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. His eyes weren't just looking at me. They were holding me, filling in the spaces my husband had long abandoned. He leaned closer. I should have stopped him. I didn't. Our lips touched, softly, slowly. It was a kiss that said more than words ever could. It wasn't wild or rushed. It was deep and full of emotions we had both buried. When it ended, we sat in silence, both knowing we had crossed a boundary we couldn't undo. I stood up, said I needed to go to bed, and left him sitting there without another word. But sleep didn't come. My heart raced. My thoughts spiraled. I knew what we had done was wrong. It wasn't just a kiss. It was betrayal. Not just of my husband, but of everything I thought I stood for. And yet, a part of me didn't feel regret. A part of me felt awakened, seen, touched in a way I had forgotten was possible. I couldn't explain it. I didn't even want to. But I knew that nothing would be the same again. Something inside of me had shifted, something I could never put back. The next morning I avoided eye contact. I moved through the kitchen like everything was normal, but nothing felt the same. Aiden entered the room casually, but I noticed the change in his demeanor. Calm, confident, like a line had been crossed and he wasn't sorry for it. He offered to help with breakfast. I nodded without looking up. The tension between us was silent but undeniable. We didn't speak of the kiss. Neither of us brought it up. But it hung in the air like a secret too loud to ignore. I kept telling myself it was just a moment, a weak lapse in judgment. But when his hand brushed against mine again, I didn't move. When he stood close behind me to reach for a plate, I felt my body react. Shame and excitement warred inside me. Later that day I caught him watching me. Not in a careless way but with intention. His eyes studied me. My face, my movements, every detail like it mattered. I hadn't felt that kind of attention in years. Not from my husband. Not from anyone. It was wrong. I knew it. But I couldn't stop myself from wanting more of it. Aiden began spending more time at home than with his friends. He made excuses to be near me, movie nights, errands, walks. Our conversations deepened. He asked about my childhood, my dreams, what I had given up over the years. I realized how much of myself I had buried for the sake of a marriage that gave me nothing back. I tried to set boundaries. I told him this couldn't continue, that it was dangerous and reckless. He listened, nodded, even apologized. But the next moment he found me alone. He whispered that he couldn't stop thinking about me. That I deserved more than being left behind by a man who didn't even notice when I cried myself to sleep. And every word felt like a needle stitching me back together. One night he touched my face and said, "You don't have to keep pretending. You're allowed to feel something again." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The way I looked at him said enough. The emotional line had long been crossed. What followed wasn't planned. It was inevitable. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I was a woman torn between guilt and desire, between loyalty and the aching need to be wanted. I told myself I was still in control, that I could stop this before it went too far. But the truth was, I had already fallen. And yet, I feared the consequences. Not just of being found out, but of what would happen when he left. Again, I found myself staring down the inevitable. His break was ending, and soon I would be left alone in this house once more. But this time, the question haunted me more than ever. Would he take this version of me, the one who had dared to feel alive again, with him when he left? Or would he leave me here, shattered all over again, only this time by something far more permanent? A mistake that couldn't be unmade. A truth that couldn't be buried. Aiden's time away from his usual life was drawing to a close, and the weight of what we had become, what we had done, was beginning to settle like dust in the corners of the room, impossible to ignore. I saw it in the small ways his demeanor shifted, the way his eyes lingered on mine but his words became fewer, quieter, as if he were already distancing himself, building walls with silence. Once, our quiet moments had been tender, full of unsaid things that felt like music. Now, the silence had a different texture, thick, strained, guilty. When he began to pack, something inside me started to unravel. Every time he folded a shirt or zipped a bag compartment, it was like watching parts of my fragile reality disassemble. Each movement was a countdown, a step closer to the vanishing point. We had crossed a line, that much was clear, stepped out of the shadows of what was safe, what was expected. But now we stood in this in-between space, unspoken and uncertain. Or now? We never talked about what came next. Not once. He didn't offer me promises or reassurances, and I never asked for them. Maybe I was afraid to hear him say the things I feared most. Or maybe I knew better than to try and stitch fantasy into something so fragile. I had spent years clinging to a marriage that looked fine from the outside but was hollow on the inside. Years wrapped in the soft suffocation of a love that had long since died. My husband had made me feel invisible. And now, for the first time in forever, someone had seen me. But was that enough to hold on to? Or just another illusion waiting to dissolve the moment he walked out the door? But this, whatever this had become, was different. It was raw, untamed, and yes, so achingly wrong. But it was also the most real thing I had felt in years. It didn't fit into any neat box of morality or consequence, yet it breathed life into parts of me I had long buried. And now, as surely as it had started, it had to end. The night before he was set to leave, something between us shifted. Aiden came to me, but not the way he usually did. There was no heat, no urgency, no hands reaching for skin or whispered declarations meant only for the dark. He stood a few feet away, as though crossing the distance would break whatever fragile things still tethered us together. His eyes searched mine, full of words he couldn't say, or maybe wouldn't. "I don't regret anything," he said, voice barely above a whisper, like it might vanish if spoken too loudly. "But I don't want to ruin your life either." The words lodged themselves in my chest, heavy and sharp. I nodded because I didn't know what else to do. My voice had abandoned me. My throat tightened, burning with everything I wanted to say but didn't trust myself to utter. I wasn't sure what I felt in that moment. Was it heartbreak, relief, or something even more terrifying? The beginning of goodbye. When morning came, there was no grand farewell, no drawn-out goodbye wrapped in longing. I stood at the door, watching him gather his things. He didn't look back. He just walked out into the early light, disappearing like a dream slipping through fingers just as you try to hold on. It was quiet, almost too quiet. No last embrace, no promises, just a moment severed clean and sharp. The house seemed to exhale in his absence, but instead of relief, it left behind a chilling emptiness. The kind that creeps into your bones. The stillness felt different now. Before, it had been a kind of background noise to my life. Now it echoed, a silence so deep it felt like grief. Days blurred together, and eventually my husband returned. He came back the same way he had left, focused, distracted, and oblivious. He brought souvenirs from his trip, little tokens of obligation, and stories from meetings with names I didn't recognize. Over dinner, he spoke of business ventures and market shifts. His voice animated in a way it never was when talking to me. He didn't notice the way my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. He didn't catch how I flinched when he touched my hand, or how often I looked past him instead of at him. He had no idea that I had unraveled in someone else's arms, that I had handed over pieces of myself I could never get back. Emotionally, physically, irrevocably. At first, I expected the guilt to come crashing down. I thought I would drown in it, that it would tear me apart with every passing moment. But the guilt never came the way I thought it would. Instead, I was consumed by something else entirely, a deep, aching sadness. Not just for the affair or the secrets, but for everything I had lost long before Aiden. For the version of myself I had silenced for so many years. For the countless nights I spent feeling like a shadow beside a man who never truly saw me. I hadn't just betrayed a marriage. I had betrayed the life I had convinced myself was enough. And now that I knew what it felt like to be seen, to be wanted, I wasn't sure I could go back to disappearing. The betrayal didn't begin with a kiss. It didn't start the moment hands touched skin or when breath caught in the space between words unspoken. No, the real betrayal happened quietly, long before any of that. It happened in the realization that someone who was never supposed to matter, someone who had simply passed through my life for a brief moment, had seen me more clearly in a single week than my husband had managed to in years. It was the way Aiden listened, not just to what I said but to everything I didn't. The way his eyes rested on me, not with obligation or casual familiarity, but with a kind of curiosity, as if I were still unfolding before him, still worth discovering. With him I hadn't felt invisible. I had felt known. And it was that feeling, not lust, not rebellion, that unspooled everything I thought I understood about myself. After he left, there was only silence. Then, days later, a single text. Just 2 lines. "Take care of yourself." That was it. No confessions. No explanations. No reaching back for what we'd left behind. I stared at the message for hours, as if reading it long enough might summon something more. An answer, a loophole, a reason to keep hoping. but none came. Eventually I deleted it. Not out of anger. Not even sadness. I think deep down I knew we couldn't keep going. What we had was never built to last. It was a spark in a storm, a moment suspended between two lives that were never meant to meet. But deleting the message didn't erase what had changed. 'Cause I had changed. And that transformation wasn't something I could undo. I had seen what it meant to be awake again, to feel wanted, present, alive. Returning to the numbness I had called normal before felt like slipping into a life that no longer fit me. In the end, my marriage remained untouched by scandal. Untouched but not unscarred. From the outside, everything appeared the same. Dinners prepared, conversations held, routines maintained. But beneath that quiet domestic shell was something hollow and echoing. I lived beside a man who believed everything was fine, who never looked closely enough to see the fracture lines spreading beneath the surface. And I carried the weight of choices that could never be undone, buried beneath layers of polite smiles and careful silences. And maybe that's the cruelest kind of punishment. Not the fear of being caught, but the burden of knowing. Knowing what I had done. Knowing what I had felt. Knowing that even if nothing changed around me, everything inside me had. That's when I understood something I'd never questioned before. Love without attention isn't really love at all. It's routine. It's muscle memory. And attention without commitment. It's just temptation dressed as possibility. Somewhere between those two truths, I lost a version of myself. The one who believed that being loyal meant being whole. The one who once thought she could survive on being seen only in glimpses. That version of me is gone now, and I'm not sure I'll ever get her back. But maybe she was never really enough to begin with. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.